powers.
Sour grapes.
Yeah, they can't resist a little dig.
No, they can't. Well, especially since they lost out on the games themselves. Well, we can discuss more of this and get Bundeep's opinion. Bundeep Rangar is the chairman of the cross-border advisory firm IndusView. Thank you very much for joining us. We've got to start with Japan. No surprise that the Wall Street Journal is still looking at this. But what's interesting is the dissemination of information, isn't it? Because we've been looking at what Tokyo Electric Power has been saying, what the government officials have been saying, and it appears there's tension between themselves.
Absolutely. TEPCO, as it's called, has been rather less than transparent in terms of getting information out. And that's caused not only tension at the government level, but also at the public level. Some of the commentary you see on television is about people saying, we just didn't know. We live close to this area, and we had no information until we saw it on television later. Now, the problem in Japan is that you've got one side of a culture which is very conflict avoidance. So people tend not to disclose too much and cause, in effect, tension. And the media has generally been very anti-nuclear, just given the history of nuclear radiation from Second World War onwards in Japan. So the more information that's passed on publicly could lead to more of a frenzy in the media, and therefore the less information that's passed on causes more tension. So it's a classic catch-22 situation, which in this time of crisis is proving very, very bad.
Let's look at what all of this means for China, because we've got the China Daily there reporting, and in fact it's also in the Financial Times today, saying that they are going to be halting, at least for now anyway, their nuclear plants. And it's fascinating because they're building 12 nuclear plants and there's 25 in the pipeline. So this could have huge consequences.
Absolutely, and Germany is reviewing 25% of its nuclear plants and put them on freeze. Look, I mean, the reality is that certain countries like France have said they're going ahead. Turkey said it's going ahead. Any country that promotes nuclear power and has a beneficial interest in there, South Africa will of course continue. The alternatives are still not fully viable yet. Do you go back to the fossil fuels and therefore be more polluting, as one example, and China's got major issues dealing with pollution on that front, while we still have about 10 years before we can get biofuel or alternative energy, solar, wind type of solutions. You look at General Electric, which is pushing in that direction, and today gets about 1% of its 150 billion sales from nuclear energy-related parts and services. They still have a 10-year lead time before they get credible alternatives. So what happens in the meanwhile is a big question.
I was just going to say, and of course it has a huge impact, doesn't it, for some mining companies, who have been relying on this kind of thing.
It does, to some degree, yes, but then it's a question also if it's coal mining and then you get into a polluting-oriented energy policy, then is that better for us? India, for example, has $175 billion staked out over the next 20 years to spend on nuclear reactors. In certain countries like France and South Africa and the United States have been pitching aggressively for their business.
It is interesting that they're reviewing this in light of what's happened in Japan. It's obvious they would have to. But also what's happened at the plant in Japan is at a plant that was 40 years old. With developments now, surely, or perhaps, there would be some consideration that safety measures would have significantly improved over 4 decades.
And the last piece that was sold was in 96. So, but out of their 54 reactors, most of them are over 35 years old. It has 2 of the world's oldest reactors. So age does, of course, play a role here. But if you look at what went wrong there, you could argue whether it was a design flaw or something that was a maintenance flaw, because you had electricity breakdowns and then you had the backup generators breakdown, which is why TEPCO is, of course, the subject of much discussion, because they're arguably the ones at fault. It really, the thing is, you can't test lab this, right? You can't see, will this system work better the next time, because the next time is just a catastrophe. And that's a big part of the big problem here.
Let's move you on to Bahrain and, of course, the steps that have been taken there to curb violence. Interesting that not one but 2 ministers have resigned in protest at this.
And of course, Bahrain is 70% Shia, with a very powerful neighbor there in terms of Saudi Arabia, which is close to the ruling family, and a very powerful alternative neighbor, which is Iran. So in many ways, which is Shia. So you've got Bahrain in some ways being the proxy for conflict between 2 major regional powers, and no clear mandate from any government to represent when you've got a 40-year-old regime there. The other thing, of course, is that this is a very peaceful protest, right? It's not like Libya where you have rebels with arms. This has been, until a few days ago, devoid of any military intervention. And now when you have military intervention, you have Saudi troops that are walking in there on the back of a 1982 Gulf Cooperation Council shield, which is designed to protect against external aggression as opposed to internal. Now, the state has asked for the support, but it's the ruling party asking a supporting regime, arguably against the interests of a good percentage of 70% of its population, which is on the streets.
Very clear that this is being driven by the Sunni royal family, isn't it? I mean, we've also had reports, we're going to get some from Caroline Hawley later on, an update from our correspondent there, that ministers, opposing ministers, are being arrested now. They're just refusing to bow down to any pressure, this royal family, internationally.
Well, the Arab Spring has taken a twist in the other direction, right? Until a few weeks ago, really, you found popular will triumphing. And today, the last 10 days, Muammar Gaddafi's reversed the tide. He's on the doorstep of Benghazi, and it looks like the might of machines and military are coming to the ruling party's aid or the ruling dictator's aid. And the same methodology is being played out in Bahrain. They're not taking the chances that resulted in the topple of governments in Egypt and Tunisia.
You mentioned Benghazi there. The Guardian there talking about the end game there approaching. Is that how you see it?
Well, I believe so. You know, the way for solving problems when it comes to popular resentment or popular antagonism with the government has been, one, mass repression or mass bribery. And in most instances across the Middle East, you find extra allowances being made, or if that doesn't work, repression. And it looks like, in the absence of a no-fly zone and a very lack of concerted will by the West to impose that, Muammar Gaddafi is really looking like he's set to take the stage back.
Britain and France's attempt to draft this resolution pointless then?
Well, I don't know if it's pointless, because I think it does expose cracks that may be useful next time round, and shows that you have to, speed is important, and you can't allow 10 days to go by, which has reversed the fortunes of the rebels.
Let's look at the tender system then in Russia. This is
or not.
Yes, indeed. Or as the Moscow Times put it, bill on tenders legalizes corruption.
I guess it's the sort of Amsterdam, Las Vegas version of Moscow here, right? And they do claim to lose a good 35 billion out of from corruption and bureaucratic loopholes and pilferage. There's a famous statement from years ago in India by a minister who said, "This is not corruption, this is commission." And the whole world works around commission. So I guess in some ways they're saying, look, they have the Winter Olympics coming up, there's a big hole in the budget, we need to find ways to access that. Let's partly legitimize what happens anyways and not profit, but certainly find a way of generating revenue from it. I guess in some ways it's the only way to tackle a problem. If you can't beat them, join them.
Well, I don't think the French are joining the British at the moment, because they're very delighted, I think, that the clock stopped, the Olympics clock.
5 minutes delay there, yeah. I mean, given the fact that, of course, Paris lost out to London, any chance of taking pot shots at London, including a clock stopping, which isn't good, by the way, of course, is adding to the ongoing English-French joisting that has been going on for decades now.
It's always fun to look at these, Bundeep. Thank you very much for joining us. Good to have you with us.
That is it from us, but do stay with us. Plenty more coming up.
More on Japan much later.